are indeed back with Much Ado About the AQ. It has been a while. Please accept our apologies for the downtime. We've been busy. We are both very busy people. Dr. Taylor has had a promotion, which I'm sure he won't mind me mentioning.
No.
And I am generally busy and have lots of things on as ever in my role. Remember, this is a hobby for us as much as anything. So it's not our job. We both work in a school as teachers, so we do have the day job to think of as well. With that said, I'm Joe Payne. I'm the host of the podcast, expert to the layman, layman to the expert, and I'm accompanied by an actual relative expert, Dr. Taylor. If you want to
Mm.
introduce yourself, Christian.
Yes, I'm the co-host apparently of the podcast, even though my normal shtick is to thank you for having me on. But yeah, I mean, I think I'm an anorak. I'd like to identify as an anorak for the purpose of AQ-ness.
Mm-hmm.
I don't pretend to be an expert, but we've interviewed some. We've got the
Yeah.
Ros Barber, hello Ros, and the Elizabeth Winkler, hello Elizabeth Winkler videos already out there. So we do talk to real experts and we're in contact with them. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. And we read lots of books by them as well. So
Mm.
one of our standard formats is to read those books, but that's not what we're doing today, although you have been reading a number of books. Today, I know, Christian, you've been busy during your downtime in between on social media. For those of you looking who are so excited to converse with me on social media, I'm done with social media. I found it was taking too much of my life away from important things like my PhD about podcasts,
Mm.
and instead have quit it. But Christian is still on there. Where can they find you?
So I'm just going to go to my PowerPoint just to
There,
check all this.
there is a PowerPoint of
Yeah, so
of social media interactions, which is where we're going to be going from today.
yeah,
And
so
let's get
just
back into it.
we say, by way of preamble, our listeners, our faithful listeners might know that when I was doing the series of podcasts, episodes on Edward de Vere, 17th Earl of Oxford and whatnot, I had a whole sheet. I had kind of like a three-sided A4 sheet of points to make. So now I've kind of gone to a PowerPoint format, which will explain itself potentially. But yeah, I am Much Ado About the AQ on Twitter, and my handle, as I believe it's called, but I don't know why it is one, but don't tell me because I'll forget, is at AQ underscore anon 76486. And yeah, the reason why I've gone for a PowerPoint this time is because essentially I've been reading a range of tomes on the authorship question or Shakespeare adjacent materials and topics since well, since 2017, but certainly since March. And I've logged everything that I've been reading and all my thoughts on Twitter. I'll still call it Twitter, even though it's X. So yeah, that was what I thought I should do today. It's just basically have a trawl through and bring everything up to date. So
Yeah.
say
Well,
when and I'll.
if you follow Christian on Twitter/X, then you might as well stop listening now. Please don't. We need the listens. We need that valediction. We need to feel like we're important in some minor way. But
Yeah, no, I'll lay a new material in. No, don't worry.
yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing is, this is not a criticism of Elon's platform, just in case he's thinking of you know supporting and sponsoring our own podcast here. But
Please do.
yeah, please do. That'd be great. Sponsored by Elon. But 120, 50 character, whatever it is, limit tweet, unless you go full bore and pay for the whole package. Yeah, you can't always say everything you want to say. I like it in the sense that it's about concision and precision, but yeah, I can flesh things out this way. The only danger, of course, is that the PowerPoint as it stands is 55 slides. So there's no end of this.
Yes, we'll be
So
here a while. I mean, this will be multiple episodes, I would imagine.
yeah. So basically, Joe and I, yeah, well, he's master of ceremonies. He'll tell me when to be quiet, and we'll get through the PowerPoint, and that will be the next probably 8 podcasts.
Yes,
Um,
indeed.
but yeah, I've started from my feed from March the 13th, and the reason I started there is because I made myself read Sir Stanley Wells's book, What Was Shakespeare Really Like? And I was instantly suspicious about this book because it was hardbacked. It looked very polished and professional. It had kind of a cutesy image of Shakespeare on the front. it wasn't a small press thing. It wasn't self-published. It had all the oomph of the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust machinery
Of course,
behind it.
Sir Stanley Wells, for those who aren't aware, is in charge of the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust.
He
Um,
is.
and
And the SBT was instituted by an act of parliament. Just thought I'd mention that.
mm,
Um, so, he's bringing the heavyweight guns to battle here. And I thought, well, I need to read it because apart from anything else, this chap is about to tell me what Shakespeare was really like. Not just like, but really like. And I thought, wow, he must have access to things that, Roger Strittmatter, Alexander Waugh, Looney, Hoffman, Barber, Winkler, et al. don't have access
mm.
to. Oh, well, I'm up for a bit of that.
He's writing
Also,
from the place where Shakespeare was born, presumably.
yes, well, yes and no. I mean, his book does take that in, and then it goes pretty much where every biography of Shakespeare goes. It goes into terra incognita and just ends up speculating wildly, as you will see. It's hilarious. But yeah, the foreword is written by Stephen Fry, and there's a Ken Branagh encomium on the front cover, and I just thought, this is for Shakespeare tourists. This is not for AQ anoraks. So, I'll have a look. I'll try and be fair to it. So, what I was posted about in March is basically that everything Wells says is piffle. So there's this terrible, lovey introduction, an unctuous encomium, as I called it, by Stephen Fry. Um, then Wells goes straight into this alleged Shakespeare portrait, which is known as the Cobb portrait, Cobbe. Um, and lots of art scholars have said, no, this isn't Shakespeare, but Wells says it is. And his reasoning is because, as follows, because the Cobb portrait descends to posterity from a family member linked to the Earl of Southampton, Wells claims that makes the sitter's identity certain. And that's because Wells says the Earl of Southampton was Shakespeare's patron. There's no proof of that. And as I say, even if you go to what I've called here liberal and doe-eyed Wikipedia, they say the same thing. The Cobb portrait, no idea who it is, and there's no evidence that the Earl of Southampton was Shakespeare's patron. I mean, just none. So I just thought, could it get worse?
Yeah, well, wasn't it supposedly the murder, a murder victim, the portrait of a murder victim, Thomas Overbury? Um,
Yes.
the Cobb
Yeah.
portrait has been suggested to be by those who don't agree.
Yeah.
And I think there's a little bit more evidence that it
Yeah.
wasn't Shakespeare than that
Mm.
it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the thing with Shakespeare portraits: the Drushut portrait from the first folio, the Chandos portrait, that they're in, said to be or claimed to be likenesses of Shakespeare, but there's no way of determining that. I've had interactions with people who say that the Drushut portrait from the first folio must have been based on a real portrait. It was drawn from life. Well, that's kind of negated or refuted by the image itself, which has the floaty head and the two left eyes and everything about it being like a weird caricature. But
From an artist who could do very good portraits.
yes, yeah, because often he's smeared as being some kind of like incompetent, but no, he was quite a polished practitioner. But where is this portrait anyway? To surmise that it was there, is one thing, but to prove there was such a antecedent portrait is quite different, and that's never been established. But the same applies to Marlowe. The Corpus Christi portrait of Marlowe
Mhm.
isn't definitively of Marlowe.
No.
Uh,
Um, Although, well, I have. I mean, I've taken a good look at the Marlowe portrait. We have a copy downstairs in the Marlowe Society library, and please do look up
mhm.
the Marlowe Society. Great supporters of this podcast.
Yep.
They're a fantastic group. But yeah, I've taken a good look at that portrait. There's no evidence it was Christopher Marlowe, but I like to think that the theory that he's in some way related to Sir Roger Manwood
Mm.
is supported by the fact that Marlowe is wearing Manwood's colours
Hmm.
on his doublet in that
Mm.
portrait. It's just a little aside, but I noticed that and I'm quite happy about it.
Mm. Well, yeah, again, I'm interacting with somebody on Twitter at the minute, somebody who's not angry with me, by the way, someone who's very affirmative and nice.
I don't believe
Um,
that. A
you do get people on Twitter every now and again who are a little bit prickly, I've noticed.
little bit.
Love it. Yeah, but this guy's got a book of Marlowe's ciphers, which is kind of hard to find, and I don't quite know the story behind those. But anyway, he's fairly certain in his own mind that Sir Roger Manwood was the biological father of Christopher Marlowe, and that would explain, the alleged Corpus Christi portrait with the doublet and the Manwood colours. Also, the fact that he was put in for a scholarship at King's and had obviously been tutored for it. His father was a cobbler in Canterbury, so it's hard to imagine how he would have, got the Latin and the Greek he needed to pass the scholarship paper for King's. And then apparently there was an income stream when he was at Cambridge, and the idea is that came in from Manwood as well. But wild speculation. But
Hmm.
just to get back to portraits, the only portrait we know is definitively of a person in the AQ kind of running. Well, there are two, I guess. One's Bacon and one's De Vere. But yeah, Wells, I thought got off to a bad start there. And then so really I could just kind of track the book now. But he refers on page 5, this is Wells, to our imperfect knowledge of the facts of Shakespeare's life, which I thought was a startling admission to make on page 5 of a book called What Was Shakespeare Really Like? And then on page 7, he says or refers to the many notorious gaps in our knowledge about Shakespeare's life. Right. So it sounds as though he's going to plug gaps with speculation, which I believe he does. And then on the same page, page 7, he talks about the paucity of personal documentation. What he didn't mention, of course, which is something that a colleague of mine in the Marlowe Society, Professor Chris Carr, who's now, I believe, chairman of the society. Oh, hang on a minute, because I get confused. Yeah, he's chairman, and Roz is now uh, a very important person in charge of things. But the point is, Chris Carr said, if you look at all the documentation or the paper trail for Shakespeare, the Stratford guy, it's all financial. It's loans, it's mortgages, and it's the Will's will. So yeah, we do have not a lot of personal documentation, but Wells could have been a bit more on the level and said what the paper trail that we do have is uniquely focused on matters fiscal and financial and legal. Um, yeah, and then where does it go from there? Well, Wells goes into the green, the green upstart crow reference and says that refers to Shakespeare, even though I think most people would say it could at least also have possibly been Ned Allen.
Hmm.
But he insists that it's Shakespeare because that fits his schema and his line of attack. Um, and then when we get to page 13, he says we have evidence of varying degrees of reliability about what Shakespeare looked like. But he's already established that the Cobb portrait is Shakespeare. And now we go to varying degrees of reliability. So it just sounds like he came out the blocks fighting, to mix metaphors, and then started to walk it back.
Yeah, he's essentially his answer to what was Shakespeare really like was is I don't know.
Yeah, I've got a few theories. I'm going to write a book about it.
Yeah,
Get Kenneth Branagh to put his name to it and or his name on it, and see if it sells. And yeah, I believe it did. Apparently, even Stratfordians are quite embarrassed by Wells's effort. And even though I leave it until March the 14th to post this, I'll read out what I put there. Needless to say, in the midst of this, I have no personal animus against Professor Wells, whom I consider a lovely, likable guy,
yeah.
and he's a good guy. We're not doing character assassination because that's cheap.
No,
Uh,
we're breaking down arguments or lack thereov here. This is
Yes. I follow Wells on Twitter. He doesn't tweet a lot, and when he does, it's always about, you know, drama and classical music. He's great fun to follow. But yeah, I just don't know what he was doing here.
we are very much in favour of anyone who pushes the arts and especially Shakespeare. And
Yes.
we do love the works of Shakespeare, despite what people have accused us of.
Oh yeah. Well, apparently there's a colleague here at work who said that a young student of the school on one occasion said, "I don't like Dr. Taylor because he doesn't believe in Shakespeare." But it says a lot, doesn't it? Because that's like not believing in Father Christmas, who's a proxy for God. And
Yeah,
we know about the religiosity component to the the debate about Shakespeare. Stratfordianism to me is a branch of the philosophy of religion. I mean, it's
Yeah,
just
returns to
which is
Winkler's book, doesn't it? It's
absolutely,
the
yeah,
heresies
yeah,
of pretending of suggesting that Shakespeare isn't
yeah,
wasn't the man from Stratford.
yeah, and other heresies, yeah, and she does that brilliant kind of work in the early part of her book where she actually shows about the establishment of the cult,
Mm,
Garrick and the Stratford Festival and the beginning of bardography, bardolatry, sorry. But that's what it is. It's worshipping a figure who represents certain ideals and ideas that you subscribe to, and he becomes a god proxy.
mm.
Yeah, and then from there, what does Wells do? Well, he's all over the place, so I just kind of got bits from what he was saying, but um, he does say things that are complete hostages to fortune and/or are just kind of really nonsensical, unless, of course, you're just buying his book at an English heritage or national trust venue, which is probably what's going to happen.
Mm.
He says to read through his complete works in chronological succession is to marvel at, and off he goes. But there is no established chronology of Shakespeare's works. The first play in the first folio is The Tempest, and that's meant to be a late play. We don't know when they were written, so it seems a really silly thing to say, unless, of course, your generic reader has no
Mm.
idea about these things.
We actually have an interesting future episode planned on the deity of Macbeth.
We do. Oh, and there's an update to that. Again, interacting recently with chap on X, who's the Marlovian guy. This is all in my Twitter feed for those of you who want to follow it. He sent some documents on to me recently, which had to do with alleged, okay, um, movements of Marlow between London and the continent, and then even out to Constantinople and the Turkey area and places like that. Now, I don't know what the veracity of that is, but one of the boats upon which Marlow is said to have sailed is the Tiger. And that's, for those of you who know Macbeth, that's a very important name indeed. Uh,
And yet, also a name of a ship that has nothing to do with the play. It's completely
mm,
irrelevant to the plot, which is
mhm.
why it's such an interesting reference to be.
Yeah. And this, I mean, we're doing the rabbit hole thing now, aren't we?
Yeah,
We're going down the
but
Macbeth
more on
rabbit
that
hole,
later.
but more on that later. But yeah, yeah, in terms of like what's the original Macbeth and what might be an interpolation, the Hecate scene, the drunken porter. Well, it could also include the tiger scene. It could have been added later. We don't know because, and last word on this, so I get back to Wells. There's no quarto edition of Macbeth, so.
Yeah.
But there you're back to the problem with dating. We just don't know. So, yeah, Wells continues. We can deduce much from Shakespeare's writings about his education, and we can relate this to what is known of the curriculum of the school that was available to him. So, appealing to what he should be proving, this is the King Edward VI, I think it is, grammar school in Stratford, which has no record of Shakespeare attending it.
Well,
Um,
those records all mysteriously disappeared, didn't they?
Well, there are no records for years X to Y, and that
Yeah.
covers late 1560s, whenever Shakespeare would have been there. Yeah, that's suspicious in its own right. Um, so yeah, and as to the curriculum, well, we know one thing wasn't on the Stratford School curriculum, and that's English. And the little bits of Latin that he would have picked up had he attended were no better and no worse than the kind of thing that everyone else at that school and at others like it would have had available to them. And there's only one Shakespeare, so Latin and Greek and Ovid reference wise and Plautus and Seneca and so on. He's very, very unlikely to have had that range of exposure at the grammar school, but there's no evidence he went. Um, Page 25 onwards, these are some of the things that Wells says. He says, deduce, we may try to deduce, we can argue, we may make deductions, we can envisage, we can deduce, may have, possibly. Taxi for Wells. What is this?
Yeah.
I want to know what Shakespeare's really like.
Yeah. If you're going to title your book what Shakespeare was really like, and then have so many conditionals and so much of this concept that we don't actually know, then you're losing your argument from step one.
Yeah. Even if I were just generic person at the National Trust bookshop at Chatsworth buying the book, I'd feel a bit cheated. I'd think, well, hang on a minute, this is a scholar and the head of the SBT, and he's not really answering his own question. And then you get into like the classic arguments from Stratfordians, and they're always about the sonnets and Hamlet. And then this is Wells on the sonnets, 1609 and all that, the sugared sonnets. He says, if there's anywhere that Shakespeare seems to be speaking in his own person, it is in his sonnets. Now, I said, what a spectacularly speculative and anti-academic comment. He would have to know who Shakespeare was and what he was like to know that the sonnets were a reflection of that personality. But that's not what he's saying. He's
Nay,
saying,
madam, I know not seems. Sorry,
yeah.
the word seems stood out there as a nice
I
little.
mean, seems is problematic word. Well, he seems to be saying, well, I've read the sonnets and I imagine this is what Shakespeare was really like. Ergo, he was QED. I mean, that's just piffle. Now, randomly, I won't keep digressing, I promise. But I'm currently reading a book by Coburn, who's a very famous lawyer, and he's from the famous, port importing family. And his is a very famous book, just re-released by the Francis Bacon Society, and it's the best single volume case for Bacon. It is claimed. I don't think so, but that'll be a future episode. He sorry, just to go back so I can remember what the hell I was saying. Oh yeah, his theory is that the sonnets aren't autobiographical. They're just not. They're based on kind of like conventional French sonnet cycles and Renaissance models. But then he says, no, actually, the first 17 sonnets, they're autobiographical. And this is something I hear a lot, but you'd have to know the personality of the guy to make that case. Coburn's obvious point is we know what Bacon was like. He wrote the sonnets, therefore we can see Bacon in the sonnets, as it were. But he's not established his first premise. So, this is just something I see constantly happening in the AQ kind of debate. But it's more common from Stratfordians. Hamlet, that's Shakespeare's mind. Really?
I think the difference is most advocates of the AQ of it not being Shakespeare come from a position of we think it's this guy. Well, this is our suggestion for who it is. Here is all the evidence. Whereas Stratfordians tend to come from a position of no, it's this guy. We
Yeah,
know.
we know who it is.
This is
Yeah.
the facts. These are the
Yeah.
facts. You are trying to adjust the facts, and we're not. We're trying to establish what the facts are.
Mm. Well, something else we're honest about, and I think so, is I would say, well, if you look at textual parallels between Shakespeare and Marlowe, that's a good case for Marlowe.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at biographical parallels between the works of Shakespeare and the life of De Vere, it's good evidence for De Vere. And the sticking point for me was, well, what about the law? So De Vere was a trained lawyer. Bacon was Attorney General, very well-known lawyer. Marlowe, nah, he doesn't have any legal experience. So that kind of suddenly for me made the case for Marlowe less emphatic or credible. But then, of course, if Sir Roger Manwood was Marlowe's father, he was, I think, Attorney General. I mean, at least he was a very senior member of the legal community. And on one occasion, sat on a jury that acquitted Marlowe of either conspiracy to murder or aiding and abetting murder.
Mm.
So there is a case for saying, well, if your father was Sir Roger Manwood, you would know the law. So I wait for the evidence to
Or at
come in.
least you'd have someone to ask about it.
Yeah, at the very least. And then there's just that wonderful thing that Marlowe did write a wonderful eulogy elegy to Manwood when he died. But he didn't write one for anyone else when they died.
No,
So anyway,
not of course that anyone wrote one for Shakespeare when he died, but that's neither here nor there.
no, his death was not marked until the appearance of the first folio 7 years later. And there it all was, suddenly confected with Ben Jonson at the helm. And if you know Ben Jonson and, his links to the Secret Service and just how skullduggerous and elusive his writing was, it's just not very, safe to say that what he was saying points back to the Stratford guy. Unless, of course, you're sitting there right now and you are a Stratfordian, in which case it does, and I'm wrong. Anywho, Wells then continues with such brilliant comments as Shakespeare may have started writing poems when he was still at school. So as I said, let's play along. He may not have. There you go. So the only way to sort out who's right is to show he went to school and wrote poems there. And there's no evidence. So yeah, Wells just a series of unfortunate, mistakes here. I'm just making something bigger so I can see it, as it were. Then we get Terence and Plautus were probably on the school curriculum, page 39. Probably.
Hasn't he previously said that he knew what was on the school curriculum?
There is a Latin, yes. So he can attest to a Latin curriculum at the King Edward VI Grammar School in Stratford, which Shakespeare didn't necessarily attend. Now we're into, well, Latin, yes. Terence and Plautus, yeah, probably. And this is important because Plautus, he provides the plot line for, I can't remember, I think it's Comedy of Errors, one of the comedies anyway. But, you've got your Ovid, you've got your Seneca, bits of, other writers. There needs to be something more than speculation there if you're relating it to the Stratford guy. If you want to show how De Vere or Marlowe may have come into contact with the classics, you can do that really easily because it's well-attested historical truth.
Yeah.
Then we get to page 40, 41 territory. We're into surely one can imagine, in theory at least, must have been a familiar figure at the royal court. More wild conjectures from Wells. On page 44, he actually says, I find it irresistible to conjecture that. And on he goes, including such corkers as some of the books he had read at school clearly gave him material for his plays. I mean, which ones? He really labors this point and builds a whole kind of, psychological case study that is grounded in nothing at all.
So essentially, he's positing that all of the genius of Shakespeare came from this grammar school education that we don't know he had.
Mm-hmm.
We have nothing in his handwriting apart from his shaky signatures.
Mm-hmm.
And this is evidence.
Yeah. Well, as long as you accept his first premise, which I wouldn't, he can keep building on it.
Yeah.
But this is the whole point. If you don't check people as you go along, we are subject to the same scrutiny, of course. But if you don't do that, then you can say whatever you want. It can be fallacy after fallacy, speculation, you name it. Wells claims Shakespeare read Cinthio in Italian, and that's the text or the author underpinning Othello. And he also posits that he read John Eliot's Orthoepia Gallica, 1593, which he may have bought in order to teach himself French. And this is another problem that Stratfordians have. How do you get this guy as fluent in Italian and French as he was, Henry V, case in point, as good as he was at geography and topography on the continent, if he is a Midlands malt merchant and a pleb who never left the country? You've got to say, well, he would have gone to the Mermaid Tavern and spoken to Italians. And he knew John Florio and he was half Italian. I mean, they're desperately trying to get the guy, an education that he didn't have, it seems. Yeah. Which is, further, terrible speculation. And then Wells gets into these moments that I just think are absolute, like, peak Wells. So this is him on page 59. And he says, and I'm just telling you what Wells says, his experience as a seasoned horseman with well-developed thigh muscles, page 59. Right. So Sir Stanley Wells doesn't know a great deal about Shakespeare's early life, but can tell us, hand on heart, and with a great deal of authority, that the man had well-developed thigh muscles. Now, I don't know why. Huh?
Oh, Stanley.
Oh, Stanley. I mean, maybe that was a Freudian slip. I don't know. Yeah. I don't want to comment. But it does seem strange to think about these things and to think that you have evidence of them. How are we doing for time, by the way? Am I rambling?
Well, I mean, yes, but that's the whole point of podcasting.
Yeah, that's right.
As a profession. I suppose if we leave it on for this episode on Sir Stanley Wells' well-developed thigh muscles, which is now the episode title, Then
Sponsored by.
we'll return next time with some less ribald content. All it leaves for me to say on this episode, thank you for listening, if indeed you still are. Please do your own research, continue to do research, read about things. Feel free to become a Stratfordian, steadfastly disagree with us if you want to. If you think that's appropriate for you, go for it. As long as you are thinking and reading, then do those things. We do have a merch store wherein all proceeds are going to charity. So please do, if you want to wear something with our logo on it, then go for it. That's merchado about the aq.co.uk. That's merch, MERCH, ado about the aq.co.uk. Because mostly because we love the pun, but you can buy a rather fetching hat or mug. I believe you've got the mug there, haven't you,
I
Christian?
have a mug, and don't forget the high vis jacket. But
Oh yeah,
here's the mug.
the actual much about the AQ mug with artwork provided by my good friend Ian Bishop. Please get in touch if you would like to commission him for some artwork. He has very reasonable rates.
Good guy.
He's a good lad. And please do get in touch by email. Much ado about the AQ at gmail.com is our email address. You can get Christian on Twitter at AQ underscore anon 76486. And I will call it there. Anon and farewell.